It's always fun when you meet somebody and you go, we're going to be friends for a really long time. That's how I felt about Rod since I met him a couple years ago. Rod is one of the deepest experts in the world with a couple decades of experience in the creator economy across YouTube, Twitter, Roblox, which is a massive gaming company. I think you're going to love the show. If you do, be a friend, tell a friend, and enjoy.
Explore the minds and marketing strategies behind today's winning brands and businesses. Tap into the power of the creator economy with Earned by Creator IQ. Here's Connor Begley.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Earned. Today, I've got Rodrigo Velloso on the show. Welcome to the show, Rod.
Thanks, Connor. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. So most people won't know this, but I actually got introduced to Rod when he was at Roblox, and he was asked to evaluate our company for investment. And he gave the thumbs up, but they gave us the thumbs down. But that's okay. We won't hold it against them. It's all good.
I didn't know that outcome.
It ended up working out. We ended up, combining the company with Creator IQ, so it was great.
That I knew. It's great.
Yeah, we ended up getting other offers as well, but that one, and I liked them too. But anyways, let's move on. So for those that don't know Rod, so he got his master's at Wharton and is one of the preeminent thought leaders and experts in the influencer space, particularly within the gaming space, where you've spent, I don't know how many years, probably 10 to 15 years at the head director of gaming partnerships at YouTube, and then global director of influencer marketing at Roblox. And now you're the VP of creator success at a company that is very much focused on creators in Spring. So I'm excited to dive in today.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
So let's start at the top. You're originally from Brazil, but you found your way into tech and then eventually to the Bay Area. What was it that you kind of attracted you first to the tech space at Google, where I believe you were there for about 8 years, and then what was it like moving away from home? That's a big decision.
Yeah, I think I was working in media for a big magazine and publishing company in the late 90s. And so I was there for like web 1.0, kind of, right place at the right time in media, which is probably the industry most impacted, by early web 1.0 initiatives. And the company got into that very much, building websites and spinning off its internet division and trying to get into the whole kind of IPO, all the M&A that was going on in Web 1.0. So I kind of got my first taste of tech that way, kind of from the media and entertainment perspective. And I was, working in strategy and corporate development, but also had a keen interest in content creation. And during my career at this media company, I transitioned from one to the other. So about half the time there, I was in strategy and corp dev. The other half, I was a publisher, an editor of magazines and websites. And that's in that context that kind of I saw tech coming, and Google particularly was like Camelot, really, like it just IPO'd, in 2004. I joined Google on this thing called Google Book Search, which was, this massive project to digitize the world's books, all of them, and create this kind of digital library of Alexandria. So it was all very kind of like, just it seemed like, like the company had IPO'd and it had that, what do you call it? Like one of its values. I don't know what would you call this, but it was in the IPO kind of documentation was the whole "don't be evil."
Yeah.
It was really changing the world, right? Today that sounds cliche, but at the time it wasn't, right? At the time, everyone was really kind of buying into that whole kind of like, yes, this is something different. And so that's really what attracted me. Like I was in traditional old school media and there was this shiny new thing. And Google had just bought YouTube as well. So I joined Google in 2007, working on essentially making that bridge between content and technology, right? Bringing content onto these kind of technological products. And so my journey really started there. And And then the moving to the US, like you can tell from my accent, I actually had lived in the US as a child. So my dad
Mm-hmm.
was a Brazilian diplomat. We lived in New York when I was a kid. I studied at American schools a lot of my life. So kind of it was something I actually wanted to do. I wanted it
Mm-hmm.
for my kids, for them to have that experience as well. And the opportunity came up about halfway through my career at Google. So I was in 4 years in the Sao Paulo office, and the opportunity came to join YouTube and move to San Bruno, where YouTube was headquartered, and lead our kind of Latin American and U.S. Hispanic content partnerships from here. So I took it, and yeah, it was amazing. Like that was kind of those I think are the two questions. So I'll try to.
Well, it's funny. I mean, obviously, you kind of shorten that down, but that was like a 10-year thing, right? That was a big chunk of your kind of early career, and to have gone through, like you said, an industry that was probably most impacted by the internet, right? Like, if you were a magazine publisher back then, like it was changing times to say the least. And actually, I'd be curious to get your opinion on, you know, the changing times for Google, right? So you've got ChatGPT that's come out recently, as well as a litany of other kind of AI tools. And I know that Google or Microsoft was a big investor in OpenAI that, they put $1 billion into it. And they're now going to start introducing some of that into Google search. What's your prediction for that, where that goes? Do you think it will end up having a pretty big impact on Google's business?
Oh, yeah. I think, what business is it not going to have impact on, right?
Right.
Is
Yeah.
AI is kind of this universal technology that's going to kind of, it's going to change everything, I think. How it's going to impact Google's business specifically, like I think a lot of Google's business is search and ad based, right? It's kind of, even YouTube, when you look at YouTube, it's the second largest search engine in the world after Google, at least it
Yep.
used to. Um, so, I think kind of the ways that AI helps people, let's say if we go back to Google's core mission, and this has probably been updated since my day, right? But at the time it was organize the world's information and make it accessible and useful, right? And
Universally accessible and useful.
universally accessible, exactly. And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
and I think the unspoken part of that is, and make money doing that, right? And so those are the questions you have to ask is like, okay, well, how does AI impact that? And those, not just kind of search, kind of, does it help people search better? Does it help people create more content to be searched? Does it complicate finding truth because there's so much more, um, just clutter or static, whatever you want to call it, interference in
Yeah.
between accurate information and just information. So it's fascinating to think about. I don't have an answer for it. I wish I did. I was more of a but I would look at it from that lens of, okay, well, how does this impact information? How does it impact the finding of not just information, right? Like when you think of content, it's really information is one, entertainment is another, and education is the third, right? Those are really the
Mm-hmm.
three types of content, and Google helps find and some in some cases consume a lot of those types of content. And so it's really, how does AI impact that part of the equation? And then how does it impact the other part of the equation, which is, the monetization of that content, whether through ads, which was kind of, Google's first kind of model, but it's not the only model these days. Google has a lot of other revenue sources developing, some based on the same content, some based on different content and technology. But
Yeah. They say, I was reading something that was interesting. It was saying that the biggest risk to Google in this whole thing, because Google supposedly has kind of similar technology, right? It's just in-house. It's not necessarily provided to the public, et cetera, and potentially even more powerful. But the problem is that like it is tough to integrate that into their existing revenue model, right? Like how do you, if you're not sending them to another site in order to get this, right, then people aren't going to advertise for that, right? Like if you're just answering the question yourself, how do you generate revenue off of that? It's more difficult. I mean, there's ways to do it, but yeah, it's just,
I agree with that though. Like if you think about like algorithms, that's the
yeah,
business. And AI is kind of like, a living algorithm, if you will.
yeah,
Maybe one way to look at it. So, before I left Google, we were already at YouTube working on kind of AI to identify, content and understand what content was and, identify similar content. And when you think
yeah,
of the application of detect truth, that becomes super interesting, right? Like at Google News, for example, we looked at, okay, well, how do you know what is the best? Is the best the most truthful? Is it the one
mm-hmm.
feeds into your perspective? Is it the one that, like, yeah, what is the definition of best
The
that
one
you,
you're most likely to click on.
well, well, I mean, like that wasn't always the case actually, like, because, there was a longevity component to this, right? So yeah,
Yeah,
if you, like, you can be, if you can click on something, but if you repeatedly click on, serve up the most clickable thing, over time, you might actually be, suggesting that you're not trustworthy because you're providing kind of not content that's not the best, and the person detects that over time.
yeah,
Uh, so it's that definition is very important to the business, right? And to the whole content model. So anyway, but those are some great applications of AI. Is like you can think of it from the perspective of, oh, it's going to convolute things because it can cause so much more content to be created, but it can also do the opposite. It can really accelerate the detection of what is fake and what is real.
interesting.
Like you could look at it from as with all technology, right? There are applications that are good for humanity and applications that are bad, and hopefully we'll be smart enough to tell the difference and pursue the ones that are, that help us.
Yeah, I think this has definitely been one of the most eye-opening in terms of just public response. I think the stat I saw was something like it took Netflix 5 years to get to a million subscribers. It took Facebook 5 months, and it took OpenAI 5 days. Right? Like it's and like people are starting to use it like in meaningful ways. It's like I was like, oh, I wonder if I can write a summary given my podcast transcript. It was like done. It was like, oh shit, copy and paste my podcast transcript, write a 4-paragraph summary of this, done. And like, it's just shocking. And it's just so early. Anyways.
And I think that's the real question, Connor, right? Like, I mean, it is early, and it's, certainly that stat is impressive of like adoption, but, I don't know how much that stat has to do with the tech versus with the distribution and like awareness factor, right? Because every single technology that has come has been adopted faster. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not like this is a new thing. Like you can make that graph. Oh, Facebook was adopted X times as fast as Twitter, which was,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
was adopted X times as fast, and Roblox and so forth and so forth. So I don't know how much it's, I think the key question is, to your point, is like, how useful is it? How much time do people spend on it? How much,
Yeah.
does it become part of their everyday kind of utility and,
Yeah.
and entertainment and whatever?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get back to you. So I want to take a step back and just kind of talk a little bit about kind of your early days at YouTube. Obviously you were there during a period of time when it was really rising to prominence, right? And I also think YouTube is unique, particularly at the time, in their embrace of the kind of creator, right? As like a core component, like, it goes to something simple as revenue sharing, right? Like, as the first ones to actually do revenue sharing with the creators themselves. Talk about some of your earliest learnings from that space, and then how how you saw just what that period was like, that kind of hyper growth.
Yeah, I mean, YouTube, I think kind of I was lucky to, I always say this. I mean, this is not my idea, Connor. Like, opportunity is the combination of luck and experience or skill, right?
Yeah.
And so I do think like there was a big luck factor involved in my kind of, just being at the right place at the right time, which was around 2011, I want to say, that YouTube kind of shifted its primary performance metric from views to watch time, right? So we kind of we were shifting from, hey, we want to have 1 billion views a day or month, I don't know how much it was, to 1 billion hours
Yep.
for that same time period.
I remember
and
hitting 1 billion hours a day a few years ago, right? It was like 4 or 5 years
Yeah.
ago. Billion hours a day on YouTube. It is a shocking number.
Unfathomable number, yeah. It's so hard to wrap your head around how much that actually is,
It's like some people it's like 1,000 millions. It's like the one I really liked. I'm going to get the exact numbers wrong, but it was like, how long is 1 million seconds? It's like, oh, it's like 23 hours. It's like, how long is 1 billion seconds? It's like, oh, that's like 30 years. It's like, what? like some obscene number. It's not that. It's a factor of 1,000x. But it was like, oh shit! Like you go from like a day to like 4 years. It's like, what the heck? Anyways,
crazy. So that shift actually like really changed our view of the business, and gaming, which was an interesting vertical. It was maybe number 7 or 8 in terms of viewership. It really popped when we started looking in terms of hours, because the videos were long, and people watched them for just a long time. And so I was tapped to kind of figure out what content and content partnerships look like for that vertical, or should look like, because our mission as the content team was to bring on content that would grow viewership, or in this case now going forward hours, watch time, and subsequently bring in revenues through that time, whether ads or otherwise. And so didn't, as a strategy guy who's coming from media, coming from that universe, it did not take me long to realize a couple of key things about this vertical. One, this was entirely new content, right? Like this stuff didn't really exist on TV. It didn't really exist in any traditional media. Yes, in Korea it did, but I only found out about that later, So up until that point, gaming for me was like a topic that I would see covered in men's magazines, and maybe there was 1 or 2 small, like dedicated, like hobby titles in the traditional media space. But so entirely new content genre, let's call it that.
Yep.
Was the number 1 realization. And the number 2 realization was, okay, well, who's driving the viewership of this new genre? It's not the game publishers. Yeah. It's not the game media companies. It wasn't even like the pro tournaments and like the sports kind of vibe thing. We explored all those hypotheses and came to an understanding that it was these independent individual creators driving like over 90% of that viewership. And that was, really an amazing realization. It's not like we weren't aware that the creator, the term creator economy did not exist at that point. So no. Obviously as YouTube, right? It's like, it's YouTube. It's broadcast yourself was the old tagline, right? Like it was absolutely about giving individuals like a voice or a channel for distribution of video content. And, we certainly understood that, there was like burgeoning ecosystems of creators, separate independent creators in lots of different spaces, from comedy to, fashion and beauty. So it's not like we didn't understand that, but generally speaking, in every other vertical, over 50% of the viewership was being driven not by those creators. It was being driven by traditional content, right? So you think of music, for example, right? Like music was probably the number 1, probably still is the number 1 vertical. Lots of repeat listening, repeat viewing of music content. So that really drives that, that volume. And when you look at music, a lot of the work that was being done was saying, okay, well, it's people taking traditional music and putting them on other types of content to enhance that content. So a big chunk of the business was just identifying that stuff and monetizing it on behalf of the labels or the true owner content, the artists or the label or whoever was managing the rights, and but of when you look at like original content, like most of it was still being put out and created by the traditional media industry, and of course there was like a growing indie artist movement, and it's still growing. But I would argue today, even today, it's still majority kind of traditional media industry driven. So gaming, I think, was the first vertical where we started saying, actually, like this vertical, we need like our largest partners are creators. They're not traditional companies. Our largest part. So we, as kind of the direct partnerships team, need to start working directly with creators. And I'm not sure if that was the start of that at YouTube. I believe it was. It was like one of my partner managers was one of the first on the direct team to work only with creators. But that was kind of, for me, certainly the wake-up call that, things are changing, right? Completely new genre of content, completely new class of enterprise behind it. Whatever you want to call it, like enterprise, I say the initiative to kind of take that and make that a livelihood in a business. And that was just fascinating to me. So say that put me on the path that I'm still on.
Yeah, it is. Again, going back to time spent, the amount of time spent with people and specifically on YouTube, but with these individuals is just, it's a lot, right? And I know that I was like, I want to get into gaming. I know gaming is going to be important for us. And so I started watching Twitch, and it's like, you start to spend a lot of time with these people, right? Like you're like, and it almost feels like you're hanging out with them, right? For like an hour, 2-3 hours a day. And that's just a much more direct connection than you can get with kind of a nameless media entity, right? And so it's meaningful and it has impact.
When you think about that time, like we actually, looked into Twitch, as an acquisition, opportunity. And certainly like when you compare live and you compare video on demand and you compare like all these different platforms today, I think that time component is still a critical way to understand things, right? Like TikTok up until recently had a 1 minute cap. Now it's 10 minutes, but I'm betting the majority of the most watched videos are still short because that's just the pattern, right? Of how people view it. Whereas kind of YouTube, maybe, fashion, beauty, like the average YouTube used to be around 3 minutes, right? Of viewership. The average gaming video was like 3 times that, right? Like 10 minutes. The average, live streaming session on Twitch was like 3 times that, right?
Yeah.
30 minutes, spending 30 minutes. And a lot of them like just, it wasn't like, a lot of them were actually spending 90 minutes in 30-minute increments, because they just happened to like log off for a minute or whatever and come back. So, so absolutely. And that drives everything to my mind, right? It's 100% about engagement. It's 100% about community. And that's really the fascinating thing to me is that community creation and community sustainability through content and through distribution and communication technology, right? Like that's for me what's fascinating about this space.
So talk to me about that community building element in the context of Roblox, right? So you joined Roblox in 2018. And I don't know, I'd be curious. I don't know the exact numbers about the size at that time, but obviously over the next 4 years went public. At one point was valued close to $100 billion. And I think the stat I saw that was wild was half of all children were playing it at one point. Over half of all children were playing it at one point in 2020. So talk to me about kind of how you leverage that concept of community building in the context of Roblox, as well as like what was Roblox when you started? Like, how big were they, and then what was it like, through that period of time?
Yeah, I mean, I started Roblox 2018, as you mentioned. If memory serves, it was around maybe 60 million monthly active users at the time.
Yep.
Um, and it had been growing, really fast for a few years. I like to say I discovered Roblox. I kind of found it on Google Trends. I was trying to figure out
Oh.
what the most popular, games to create on YouTube were. And Roblox to me was like a Minecraft copycat.
Yep.
And when I saw it, like it was like on Google Trends, it was like, oh, number 6, 7, showing up like top 10 on YouTube, sources of gaming content.
Yep.
And that was surprising to me. Minecraft had long been number 1. And Fortnite was at its peak, kind of almost bumping up against Minecraft. So I was surprised to find Roblox, and I dug in, and I'm like, I was astounded by it. I understood this is not a game. This is a platform for creating interactive content. And
Yep.
it seems to already have an organic creator ecosystem, like a parallel creator ecosystem on YouTube, on video, which to my mind was, I already understood that interactive needed that video window, right? Like I'd been
Yep.
working in gaming content on YouTube for years. And that's kind of the only way for you to see into, the interactive experience other than to go and play it, which is, sometimes a higher bar or higher barrier to entry than just watching a video. Which is why it's kind of the main marketing, channel for
Yep.
all gaming content today is influencer or creator content. So kind of lost my train of thought a little bit there. But anyway, so
the community building element around Roblox was one of the things I talked about.
So it was around 60 million, right? Like
Yep.
we were talking about how big it was, right? And how I'd found it. And so I kind of joined with this understanding that, okay, well, here is a kind of interactive content platform that already has this organic kind of, discovery or marketing, if you want to call it, engine, that's growing with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really kind of the understanding that I brought to the table, right? Like I saw that from the outside. I saw that they were looking for a director of influencer marketing.
Yep.
I had never held any role with the
Yep.
influencer marketing title. And before I joined, I tried to change it to something else, because like creators don't particularly like being called
That word. Yeah.
and it wasn't really what we were looking for, but it was certainly marketing, right? It was certainly the main source of awareness for Roblox, the main source of engagement. We were seeing that. The company was already seeing that from its research, its marketing research, and that's why it was looking to hire someone. So it was really kind of just a strong match. And I came in with a lot of understanding of like the YouTube side of that equation and what drove creators, and brought that understanding to Roblox. And I think what really, it's late stage kind of startup. So the environment is very resource constrained, as you can imagine,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
A platform that's growing super fast, that has 60 million monthly active users, but 400 employees, I think, when I joined.
Yep.
So, and 75% of those by design, product and engineering, and when I say by design, because that's the philosophy Dave, as a CEO, had and continues to have. I think wanted like a platform centric team. And it's growing so fast, that, doubling every year, that, it's really challenging to say, hey, we should take some of our resources and put it against marketing, right? Like,
Yeah, totally. It's like, well, we're already growing pretty fast.
Yeah. So the trick there, if you want to call it, was just to kind of like raise awareness of like, go get the data, right? Say, hey, like, look how symbiotic these two things are. Look how much one, like, sometimes one is the leading indicator, sometimes the other is. Here's a theory about how those two things interact. Here's what's going on in other properties in the interactive content space. Like there's this similar correlation, right? Like Minecraft, Fortnite, etc.
Yeah.
So something is there for sure. Attribution was always a challenge, but at the beginning, it's just such a strong correlation, and it's it makes sense to
it's so logical. Yeah,
so logical to say, let's go experiment. Let's go put money into understanding this better, and that was the pitch essentially. And as we started seeing the results and seeing kind of that that was working, or at least we were continuing to grow, at a phenomenal rate, like accelerating, actually, like gaining share and gaining positions. Like we went from being the eighth, like I said, seventh, eighth source of gaming content on YouTube to being the second after Minecraft, right? And so we were gaining in share, we were gaining in volume. The company, continued to grow super fast. And so that but the attribution remained a challenge, kind of to get more resources. Like, okay, well, how do we know that like this wouldn't be happening anyway? Right. It's very tempting to think that when you're growing so fast, because our product is great. It's because, and it is also that for sure. Right. I don't, challenge that. But yeah, I think kind of the fascinating thing about Roblox was, it was, I think one of the learnings, right, is that I think kind of it really started to grow really fast around 2014, 2015, when two things happened. One, a lot of, it introduced monetization, which I think is the key thing. When you look at, where the best content is, it's where creators of that content can get compensated for it. And there's a path to building a business around that, because the more a creator can dedicate themselves to making the content, the better that content becomes. The more expertise they can bring into that craft from in areas that they don't necessarily dominate, even if they are a great entertainer or a great artist, the better it becomes for them. So kind of that ability is what drives the growth in the long term, right? The ability for artists and creators to get compensated, and that's what Roblox introduced in 2014. The ability for devs, it's called DevX on Roblox. So the ability for developers of content on Roblox, creators of interactive content, to convert Robux back out into
cash
in varying currencies. And YouTube is the other kind of platform that has a really strong monetization model. So that was one of the drivers. The other one, I think, was kind of Minecraft's acquisition by Microsoft, and at least the initial kind of restructuring that happened around Minecraft content, which was a very open platform in which Minecraft wanted to kind of put a little bit of a wall around, which ended up alienating some creators who kind of saw in Roblox the opportunity to do this fascinating thing, which I think still is fascinating, right? Which is to build a multimedia content business.
Yeah.
I'm in video, but I'm expanding into interactive content. A lot of Minecraft creators were already doing that. That a lot of Minecraft YouTubers had roles or equity in Minecraft servers, and where people did multiplayer, like whether it was Hypixel or the what was that Minecraft Hunger Games game? I forgot.
I don't remember. I know what you're talking about.
All these different iterations of Minecraft, so people could have just a regular server to play vanilla with friends, and there was a cost to that, or they could have a whole like version of the game that was modded by independent developers. So there was that independent developer or that indie aspect to Minecraft, which was a little bit alienated when Mojang was acquired, and that was enough to kind of kickstart the Roblox kind of video ecosystem, because a lot of those creators said, oh, here's another interactive content platform that has its own business model.
It's kind of surprising that more of the social companies haven't moved towards kind of revenue sharing models, right? Because I think as a social platform, you can really deliver. There's two different kinds of value, right? So one is cash, right? Like I can make money, right? So that happens in YouTube, Roblox, etc. The other one is distribution, right? So like, there's a lot of people moving towards TikTok because there's so many people on TikTok, right? And there's not enough content. And so there's a chance to gain distribution, so you gain followers, right? But it's like, it's just been shocking to me because I think a big part of YouTube's success is that a lot of people, that's how they earn their income reliably, right? Is like on YouTube. And the fact that like other platforms, I mean, again, it's probably hard to say, well, we're making all this money, we're going to cut it down by 30% and give it to other people, right? Once you're making all that money, like that'd be hard for Instagram to do that. But in terms of longevity, it just seems so critical, right? Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, for me, and I don't know if this is the correct diagnosis, but having worked at Twitter also in between there for just about a year, um, I think the feed model has a lot to do with that, right? Like when your traffic, when your viewership is all coming from the feed, which is, let's say, a curated experience, which combines, let's say, not like the content that people make and publish, but also kind of how do you display that content. First of all, it makes you think that it's the curation that is what people are, because people are scrolling through things. And so, of course, you understand that content is critical to that, but you can't necessarily compensate all the content creators. There's not much of a difference between, it's harder to value. Okay, well, what did like the New York Times article link do for keeping that person on the feed versus their friend versus something else that they follow? Like it's harder to measure let's say what's keeping the person on the feed, and the ad is coming in between two different pieces of content. So even if you wanted to attribute it to one of them, you'd have to question, how do you actually attribute this?
Yeah, who gets credit for that?
It's harder, right? Like because of the feed model, to say attribute. At Twitter, when I was there, we introduced video, and it was much easier to say, oh, somebody's watching a video that this person posted. That's very clearly, if we serve an ad within that, after they've already been viewing for us, then that's very clearly coming from that creator. And we did try to introduce that model. I can't say why it didn't continue. It was successful early on.
Yeah.
I think kind of the company has a lot of, and sadly continues to have a lot of management, which is part because of its kind of this whole like confusion of, oh, it's the town square and it's the conversation and it's what's happening now, and beyond just a distribution platform. And anyway. So I think it has to do with the feed model. That would be my theory, that the feed model makes it complicated, but it fits the facts, right? Like Facebook has Facebook itself, Instagram, both feed oriented.
I feel like you can solve it though. There's a lot of smart people. Like you could like come up with some proxy, but yeah, the feed model definitely makes it more difficult for sure. And maybe I'm sure I'm underestimating it. You mentioned management issues at Twitter. Are you a believer? What do you think? Do you think is it going to implode, or do you think Elon's going to kind of take it to the next stage, or does it just kind of continue along?
I'm skeptical of someone who has no real kind of media or social media experience. Just kind of, as brilliant as they may be in other fields I've seen like that happen. just to draw completely different comparisons and not speak just to the person, because I think it's I'm not a believer that anyone does anything alone, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I find that whole meritocratic idea a little misleading. So it's not just about that individual, but I feel like when there's no kind of background, no history, no experience at that top level, it gets complicated. And there's great examples of this happening across tech, right? Like if you look at Google Stadia, Google Plus, just to stick
Yep.
with ones that I had like a first, row seat, right? Like, those are like attempts to do something that was beyond the core of the company or of the team. So they were just as much as like folks that was just not in the DNA, right? So I just feel like that's the problem there. It's like there's not a core DNA. It's not within this. It's kind of an alien organism, and I don't think that works out. Which is not to say the company doesn't thrive.
Yeah.
Or doesn't find that isn't realized fairly quickly, and the right team is found. That happens with kind of investments all the time. So I really think it's right about putting the right team in place, and I just feel like it's moved away from that, right? Like I'm not sure that this kind of like, hey, let's start from scratch on that front is the best approach. So I will say this: I love Twitter.
Yep.
Having worked there for only a year, it's still one of my favorite apps. It's certainly a big time, a big amount of my screen goes to Twitter. So I really hope that it will find its path, that team will be found. I think that might take longer than it would have in another structure, but I'm hopeful it will happen, and I really think it comes down to that. It comes down to kind of bringing the experience and empowering the right vision of it.
I was always surprised. I always felt like the right path for Google to build like because Google Plus, right? They were trying to compete in the kind of social space. It always felt like it's like, I mean, you already have YouTube, right? Like if make YouTube, why not have a feed experience where people can share it? You know what I mean? Like you already have people interacting there. I don't know that it would have worked, but it always felt like if that was like, that would have been the path, right? Like have you, and they're doing this in some ways in a totally different way, which I think is fascinating. Like I love YouTube TV as well. But it's like build off of the back of that, right? Like you already have the users, you already have content, right? Like you could build a feed based experience that included text and other, media formats. And they're doing that a little bit with YouTube Shorts, right? But it always felt like the right path to me, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with success.
It's worked out pretty well for Google. So let's talk about Spring. So you've been at Spring for 6 months now, right? Obviously now the creators are your customers in a lot of ways, right? So that's really, you're enabling them to kind of monetize, right? So they've now built up this distribution, this audience. And I think one of the primary ways that they connect with their audience as well as monetize their businesses is through, gear, right? Stuff, shirts, all these kinds of things. What was it that made you excited about Spring to join? And then, what have you noticed in terms of, obviously you had deep experience with the creators and the gaming side, but Spring doesn't only work with gaming creators, right? They work across the ecosystem. So what have you noticed that's different about the kind of the broader creator ecosystem that maybe you didn't know before?
Well, what drew me to Spring, I think it's kind of my career moment, right?
Yeah.
More than anything else. So I decided to leave Roblox in May of last year, after when I completed 4 years at the company, and I kind of fully vested, and because I felt I had gone through a cycle there.
Yep.
lot of changes were coming in terms of the growth vision, uh, moving, let's say, away a little bit from the core community and looking to how to expand into new segments, particularly older audiences, and also new countries, new languages. And my interest, let's say, I think, was in that community aspect, in
Yep.
the connection between, content, creator, and community, and the sustainability of creator businesses through kind of, just leaning into that, right? As artists, as content creators, like, creators are about creating that connection and about uh, um, connecting with the people that consume their content through the content itself in a first stage, but then through repetitive consumption of content and increasing understanding of the creator behind that content, it becomes more than that. And that's really cool in and of itself. And additionally, it also is what drives, in my view, the commerce opportunity, right? Or the monetization opportunity, if you want to look at it more broadly. It's that. So I was keen to kind of continue exploring that, like leveraging my creator content and growing community knowledge, right? The desire to go into Twitter, the desire to go into Roblox was very much about enhancing my capability in that community building aspect. And so at least my role, a lot of new leaders came into Roblox with the IPO, right before the IPO, right after the IPO. And with that new direction, I felt like I needed, to move on. So I was looking, as I exited Roblox, I started working with a lot of startups in the both the creator economy and metaverse spaces, but really trying to find a next opportunity that had a few characteristics. Like, one, that my kind of background experience with creators, with content, could drive an outsized impact on the business.
Mm-hmm.
And two, that I could have an equity in the business, such
Yep.
that to the extent that happened, I would be a builder. I wanted, not just from a financial perspective, but from a realization perspective. From, hey,
Yep.
I
Yep.
I built this thing.
Yeah.
And so here's where I will share a scoop with you. I've given you the scoop on your podcast.
Oh, woo! Let's do it.
And I didn't say it earlier because I didn't want to interrupt the flow. But with Spring's acquisition, Spring was acquired by a company called Amaze in November, beginning of November of last year, which I think was absolutely the right move for the company, and I think it's an exciting kind of direction that they're going in. But with that acquisition and the restructuring that came with it, it really no longer aligns with these core objectives that I laid out.
Gotcha.
So I actually I'm transitioned from a full-time employee to consultant as of January 1st, and I'll be consulting for the next several months. But I'm kind of in the process of transitioning out of that role and back to my search for that next thing, where kind of, for me, again, it's going back to what drew me to Spring in the first place, which was your question. I'd say it's this idea of commerce and a community, and how we enable creators to build those two things together, or put another way, build community in a way that is sustainable for them as creators. That I think the most fascinating thing about Spring and the different types of creators, and I was already seeing this at Roblox and other platforms, and kind of I moved away from like if you look at my career path, I kind of see myself as having moved away from ad revenue as a primary source of creator sustainability toward commerce, toward fan-based revenue, whether subscriptions or events, or like I loved all of like cameos and all of these different. And what I found at Spring that was fascinating, branching out beyond gaming and like the very particular monetization models for creators in that genre can be very different from the monetization models from creators in other genres, like health. I mean, a lot of like health and well-being creators have much smaller followings, but because of the repeat nature of the interaction and the intensity of the interaction and the fact that they bring so much know-how and useful knowledge, practical knowledge to their fans, they don't need, right, the 100,000 followers that that a Roblox video star needed to have to be kind of, to even show up as a blip. Sometimes they can have less than that and create a sustainable business. And that's really where it's fascinating to me, is like understanding like all of these different paths to being a creator, a full-time creator, which some might argue stems back to my own frustration as a creator who never managed to make it as a creator and had to turn to being like, an executive.
Oh man. Well, I think you're going to get a lot of contacts after this podcast, which is good. So I really appreciate you taking out the time, Rod. I've got one last kind of fun question. So obviously you've interacted with, you are a user of social media. I know I share far too much stuff with my friends and family. What is, if there were one person that you shared the most often with your friends and family, could be Twitter, TikTok, whatever it is, YouTube, what would who is that creator?
Oh man, that is a tough one.
It's a tough one, right? Or it could be a genre of content. It could be genre of content too.
Like I'm honestly like I'm a big like consumer of series. I feel like my most the thing I most share is like telling my kids what to watch. I have 3 daughters, 16, 18, and 21 years old. So they're very much in the so they share a lot of TikToks with me.
Yeah.
But I find it's very interesting to notice it's very rarely creator based, content based, right? So it's like me that are kind of help us connect around an idea of what a oldest daughter is. So again, like content and community, right? Like it's our family is a community too. But lately I've been really fascinated with LinkedIn. And, I'd say kind of as a creator economy guy, I've been sharing a lot of content in that space. Like, I'm not Colin and Smear. And like kind of like I'm discovering, let's say, perhaps late, a lot of the great content, around the creator economy that's being generated, so a lot of it kind of journalists branching out into like, I don't want to come in here and cite a bunch of your competitors.
No, it's okay. It's all a rising tide, right? Like,
but they're super interesting sources of content. A lot of like, so, I actually at Spring got to work with Lauren Schnipper and Josh Cohen from Tube Filter to the Creator Upload podcast. And, I've been listening also to, I reconnected with Jim Louderback, who's an old friend, and is now doing, I forgot, like he's actually on his second Creator Economy podcast, so I don't want to mess up the names. I think the one he's doing currently is with a journalist from The Information, if memory serves.
Okay, cool.
I think there's a lot. I've been sharing a lot of content about the creator economy. Like I've been trying to create, let's say, or at least not really create, not with the ambition of gaining a following, but just with the ambition of pushing myself to write more. And writing about what you know is the easiest. So kind of, I think throughout the last year, I kind of shared a lot of creator economy content on LinkedIn. I would say that was other than sharing kind of news shows and TikToks with my daughters, I'd say the more relevant answer for this audience is probably that. It's like, I think
LinkedIn is highly underrated. It's heavily utilized, and the engagement on it is significantly higher, right? There's something about kind of it being like a quote unquote closed ecosystem rather than like Twitter. It's like, I'm afraid to even like something on Twitter because I know, like, one, I don't know how opinions are going to change over time, right? Like you like something and today that's okay. 10 years from now, maybe not. And then like separately, I think that like, it's just so public, right? Anybody can see it. And and I think in a lot of ways it was smart. You saw they started showing views on Twitter where you can now see how many people view something, which is like, holy shit. It's like so much higher than you would expect because engagement on a per view basis is so much lower. So I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn, particularly for that type of content, right? Professional content.
Sure. And when we talk about like community and we talk about like credibility and content, right? Like all topics that we've broached, like LinkedIn is very unique in the sense that like the credentials of the creator are all like very right there.
Like you like who is this person?
Whole resume. Exactly. Like, it's not, here's my social media and you can find out how many followers I have. It's not a popularity contest. It is that too, but it has this additional layer of credibility of identity, real identity, deep identity.
That's fascinating. I hadn't thought about that before. Because you go to somebody's Twitter, okay, there's a short bio, but there's not much there. It's like, okay, here's my post, and here's my resume with my post.
Yeah, and on Twitter, it's like, oh, here's what I want my friends and potential like outsiders to know about me, and that's what I write in my Twitter bio. And LinkedIn is like, here's what I want like people who want to hire me or pay me somehow to know.
Yeah.
So it's a whole other incentive system.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, Rod, I feel like I could go for another hour, but I want to be respectful of your time.
No, it's been a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it, Connor.
Yeah, this is great. And I'm excited to see where your next landing spot is. I think we're going to have to talk some advisory stuff here ourselves. And awesome. And congrats again on all the success. I think what you've accomplished is just so impressive.
Thanks so much, Connor. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me. And Happy New Year to you and to all your listeners.
Yes, you too. All right. Bye, Rod.
Bye. Thanks, Connor.
Be a friend, tell a friend, and subscribe. Earned by Creator IQ. Creator IQ is your all-in-one solution to grow, manage, scale, and measure your influencer marketing program. Ready to unlock the power of the creator economy? Get started with a demo today at creatoriq.com.